Hey there, this is That News You Care About, a weekly video game news show from the folks over at That Nerdy Site. Today is Monday, July 6th of 2020, and I'm one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson. Joining me this week is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
Hello. It's very hot here in Phoenix today, and my air conditioning can only do so much to combat against that. So it is definitely the Phoenix sun here today.
Yeah, it was on the 4th of July here in Austin, it was 102 degrees as a high, which I was absolutely thriving in. There were a few people I know in Austin who enjoyed it less for some reason, triple digits, but I don't know. It was a nice balmy 102 here. How about you in Phoenix, Trev? What was it?
I wasn't paying attention to the weather on the
We're gonna
fourth
say triple
itself,
digits.
but oh yeah, it is right now here at 7:05 p.m. as we sit down and record this. It is 108
Give it to
degrees
me.
out.
I'm ready. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's what this has been like. Like I've had my air conditioning for the last few days set to like 70 degrees, and even in my tiny studio apartment, the thermostat can't get down below 80 because it's working its hardest, but it just can't do it.
It's so hot.
Yeah.
God damn.
Not fun. So I got like 2 bottles of water here
it's-
near me to try and keep me hydrated
Yeah,
and
Trevor,
safe.
stay hydrated, please. But yeah, it was the 4th of July. It was fun. I watched Hamilton for the first time. You can check out my thoughts on it in a podcast coming soon.
It will already be out by the time
Yesterday.
this goes live.
I guess it would have already out. It's already out. Go listen to it right now. Stop what you listen to this podcast. Go listen to that one and come back. Or maybe don't. That one's longer. Go listen to this one first. But today we are not talking about Hamilton, unfortunately, tragically. We are instead talking about video games. You might have heard of them. NBA 2K21, peering into the future here. Its recommended price is my favorite thing about this. Not like it's like set recommended price is $69.99, $70. For the Xbox Series X and the PS5, $64.99 in pounds if you're a nerd and want to know that information. Which is kind of the first big game I can think of. And Trevor, you are the historian of the video game industry here, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. But the first one I can think of that has kind of cracked that $60 threshold that has kind of been the standard within the industry for at least the past 3 generations.
Yeah, I mean, it's the pricing of games is kind of all over the place, especially with like all of the special editions and all that kind of stuff. The thing I think that's really specifically of note on this is that it's the $69.99 for the next generation, while the PS4 and Xbox One versions are still going to be at the current currently accepted price of $59.99. But yeah, if you go back to like historical kind of looks and stuff, like Super Nintendo games were selling for like $70, $80 back in those days. But yes, for the last couple generations, it's been it's the standard
It's a
kind of
PS2, yeah.
standard edition of a game has peaked out at $59.99 as for your big budget AAA kind of experience, with indies kind of exploring a variety of other different prices, but most of the big studio games have kind of peaked there. So yeah, 2K coming out and saying, hey, we're launching the first salvo, and next generation is going to be more expensive because it's going to take advantage of the technological hardware of the next generation or whatever. It's like, okay, well, that's there we go. they're finally jumping out with this.
I think there's a great quote by former PlayStation head honcho Sean Layden that he had during a Game Lab conference last month. And in that he said, quote, "It's been $59.99 since I started in this business, but the cost of games have gone up 10 times. If you don't have elasticity on the price point, but you have huge volatility on the cost line, the model becomes more difficult. I think this generation is going to see those two imperatives collide," end quote. And he also later on mentioned the fact that one solution to the rising cost of development is to create shorter games. But yeah, I think Sean Layden's point is kind of one that certainly anybody who's like even slightly attuned to games has kind of been aware for a long time, where it's these games are getting more and more and more expensive to make. They're getting more complex, and just the price of everything in the entire world has gone up, obviously, in the last 20 years, and video games prices haven't, right? Like, the price of a movie ticket or to see a play, to buy a TV. I don't know what people do, how the TV works, but to buy an album, like, these things are going up. They're getting more expensive to cost. But so is every other good in the world, right? Inflation just kind of rises the prices of things. And the fact that games have managed to kind of keep the same price, I mean, legitimately for going on 20 years now, it was kind of inevitable that it would eventually, something was going to give, but it is nonetheless interesting to actually kind of be in that moment of this could be the actual like tipping point, canary in the coal mine, that next generation games are going to be more expensive, right? Like, I think it's one for me that we've talked before about. Me and you have had this conversation, I feel like, a few different times, where, to Sean Layden's point in particular, like, there needs to be more of a broad spectrum of what games can cost, right? Like, first off, not every game needs to be $60 or $70, right? Like, I was having this conversation with a few buddies of mine who basically, they're the guys who play Call of Duty and they play Madden, or maybe like NBA, and that's it. That's all they play in a given year. And one of them like shared the NBA news with me, and I was like, yeah, I mean, games have been the same price for 20 years, and maybe this is a time where like games can kind of be different price points. And even like the buddy of mine who plays 2 games a year was like, yeah, I mean, like, not everything needs to be the like $70, right? Like, and I was like, yeah, see, if he can understand it, I have faith that like all gamers can understand that concept behind like things are going to be more expensive, A, and B, maybe, first off, I'm just going to pick in a little bit, maybe the new Crash Bandicoot game, for starters, doesn't need to be $60, right? Like, maybe we can have $40 games and $30 games and $20 games and really explore the pay scale. And then, yes, that also means that, like, some games are going to be more expensive than $60, right? Because, like, at the end of the day, does something like The Witcher, or The Last of Us Part 2, or Mass Effect, or these kind of giant games, or even like an NBA game, which you can get just like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of content out of, do they necessarily need to be the same price as Crash Bandicoot? Not to pick on Crash, but like that game is going to be a 9 to 10 hour game that is like essentially like a really fancy, nice PS1 platformer game. And so I think really exploring that pay scale, really recognizing the fact that games are costing more to make, like, I don't know. This seemed inevitable. What do you think? What are your thoughts on that, Trev?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm like fascinated in part. I think it's very funny to me that it's 2K that's coming out, and specifically like the 2K basketball game, given its history on this show in particular in our brief 10 weeks period, because you had a big old rant in our PlayStation predictions, or not the predictions, the
Sure
PlayStation
did.
5 event episode, about the absurdity that like the pricing of NBA 2K games had not gone down, and so the fact they're only going up. The thing that gets me specifically about like sports games is I don't understand why it's not just why they aren't more like a platform, in that like something like Destiny, where you buy the game. So you buy, NBA 2K20 now, say, and then when 2K21 rolls around, people can buy 2K21 as like a full price game, or if you have 2K20, you can just buy the roster update or something like that. Like, I don't get why sports games don't fit like that, especially because I feel like they probably aren't having to do a ton in terms of like iterations year over year. That said, I totally understand that like they are on a 9-month dev cycle every year for those games, so I don't envy the amount of work that they're having to put into those. But I think they could also probably get away with doing less work, and not be as stressed and burnt out about it. And yeah, so I would sooner see them like price that stuff accordingly. But in terms of games in general, yeah, I would love to see a lot more variance in game pricing. I would love to see, because I don't like, in the same way that not every game needs to be $60 or whatever, not every game needs to be a 30-hour experience. And so maybe if you're doing, like if you're going to do a, hey, let's say we're going to make a single player, like a Hellblade or something like that, that's a, less than 10-hour experience. That didn't come out at $60, and that was still a great experience or something like that. And I would love to see studios do more and have their games kind of priced more appropriately for the level of experience that they're putting into it. In the same like vein, it's gamers and game pricing is like so oftentimes frustrating. Like right now, the Steam sale is going on, and there are a ton of people that are buying games that they could have bought, a month ago, 2 months ago, back when the games came out or whatever, at full price, but they specifically didn't want to pay full price because they wanted to save $10 on it or something like that. It's like, okay, but like that $10 could have meant something to those developers back at launch, or it could have helped kind of, get buzz for a game going or something like that. The fact that people are like waiting or insist they can't. I can't pull up the quote, and I don't have, or the tweet, and I don't have it just readily available. But Rami Ishmael, in the big prominent voice in the games industry, said something to the effect like, when this news broke, to the idea of like, it serves the people right who are going to complain about this, because they're the same people that complain about an indie game being $5 or $10 or something like that. And it's like, yeah, it's absurd that the amount of quality you can get from some of those games, and the fact that people like devalue them so much, where they scoff at like a $15 or a $20 game because of the price point. I remember, and like not to throw him under the bus, especially because he'll be on the episode later, but I remember sitting down with Cameron and talking to him about Florence at some point. And Florence on mobile was like a $3 experience or something like that. And we talked about it, and like I enjoyed Florence. I didn't think it was like as earth shattering as a lot of other people did, and I think you in particular were one that like I know very much loved Florence. And he even looked at that and was like, yeah, it wasn't worth the $3 for me. I was like, how was it not worth the $3 for you? So I like, even that, it's just like, the value of games is such a nebulous concept and nebulous idea for so many different people that I think the fact that, and I don't think it's helped by the fact that prices haven't drastically changed in the industry in the last 15, 20 years. I am looking at a Toys R Us ad from 1996 that was asking for NBA Hang Time on the Super Nintendo for $69.99, and that in $1996 is equivalent to about $113 in today's money. So, like, yeah, price of gaming has definitely gone down across the board, and even at a $69 price point, the thing I'm very curious about will be like, how many other studios will follow suit and basically say like, okay, yeah, we can, like, 2K is going to get away with $70 games, so we'll get away with $70 games too. Or will other publishers basically try and set themselves up as like the more valuable offering and say, hey, our competition, like, does EA come out and say, hey, they're charging $70 for their sports games, we're going to keep charging $60, so come buy Madden again. Because I think that like when we see what EA does, especially in response to this, I think that's the most interesting element to me. And the thing also that I hate that it's 2K that's trying to do this, is these are also like $70 to start games, because they all still have like microtransactions and loot boxes and shit like that in packs of cards and other games and everything like that. So it's like you're already making way more money off of your players than the base $60 price point that you're charging people now. So like, don't tell me you can't make a profit off of that price point with all the other add-ons that you sell, and try and like bullshit me and say that no, you really need to charge $70 for this to really make use of the new generation's technology. It's like bullshit. Especially as we see like so many games that are completely happy to give away free upgrades to the next generation version of their games if you buy the current version. You know, Avengers is doing that, Cyberpunk's doing that.
Yeah.
A handful of others that escape my mind right now. But like if you buy the PS4 or the Xbox Series, I think Assassin's Creed Valhalla is probably another one. Like you buy the current gen version, you know, you'll get a copy of the next gen version for free, and it'll just be added into your library if you buy it digitally, or you can use the disc and play the upgraded version or whatever. So it's like other companies are doing fine. 2K just likes money, and they like having as much money as they can get. GTA has spoiled them on that front, I think, and so they're using this opportunity to say, hey, yeah, it's a console generation shift, so we're gonna finally pull the trigger on charging more.
It's interesting for me, like the two big ones I kind of want to touch on that you really went over there are the idea that, yeah, like Hellblade, for example, is really fantastic. I think really phenomenal video game that isn't necessarily $60. And Ratchet and Clank, the PS4 one was $40, I believe, when it came out.
Yep, I was just thinking about that one too. Yep.
Yeah, and there's something to be said, I think, for the fact that these games might be cheaper, but like I would actually be really interested to see if like they sell more on the back end because of the fact that that lower price point allows more people kind of in, or like makes it seem less of like an actual like big investment to do it, right? Like the difference between like a $40 game and a $60 game is $20, but that $20 I like wonder how much of a difference that makes in terms of sales, right? Like would Ratchet and Clank have gotten as much like critical buzz and just like fringe industry buzz if it had been a full-fledged $6 game, right? Like I think there's just some sort of like mental like catch about a game being like $60 and that like requiring like this extra thing, and being $40 allows your game to kind of be like the stakes not as high, which also allows more people to kind of come into the game because it's cheaper too, obviously. Like if Gone Home had been $60, Gone Home would never have been a phenomenon, I think. Like it just wouldn't have really caught on in the same way, right? Or Undertale or
same with like Stardew Valley.
Yeah, right. And so I think it also affords games who maybe aren't The Last of Us or Uncharted or The Witcher a chance to really kind of flourish and really kind of get into as many kind of hands and get seen by as many eyes as possible if they are cheaper and if they do more fully explore that price point. And then again, on the other end of the spectrum, like I don't think there's anything illegitimate about like CD Projekt Red, for example, coming out and being like, we're making a game and it's going to be $70 because this game is 150 hours long or whatever, and it has this amazing thing, and the map is the size of like actual New York City or something like that. And it's like, yeah, if you make a game like that, like there's I think it's also totally valid to be like, this game is cost a lot to make and took years to make, and so like we would like to see some sort of profit for this thing.
But at the same time, like imagine if Marvel came out and said, hey, it cost us $200 million to make Avengers and Endgame, so we're going to charge you $30 a movie ticket, versus like Parasite coming out and being like, hey, we're going to charge you $10 a movie ticket or something. Like, no, it's just like there's just an accepted price across like movies that you go and see that in theaters, you're going to see it, you know, more or less at the same price point, because it's like regardless of the amount of money that got put into the thing, because they're expecting they put into it what they expect to get out of it on the back end, but they like it's still all using a uniform price point. So even that, like the fact that like gaming does have so many different price points makes like almost no sense in that kind of conversation as well.
Yeah, but games are so much different, I think, right? Like to me, the problem with the movie one is that like, because ultimately like the longest and the shortest movie that you're going to see in a theater probably range from like 90 minutes to like 3 hours is really, I think, pushing it nowadays for like movies you're going to see in a movie theater. And so like the time investment is just smaller, right? Like whereas something like Gone Home, which you can beat in like an hour to an hour and a half, versus The Witcher is not an hour and a half. You can beat that
game in a minute.
It's 100. Yeah, it's like exactly.
There's a trophy for it, actually.
Yeah, it's like 120-hour difference, right? Or like something like Persona, right? To Undertale or Edith Finch or Hellblade, it gives you like 100-hour time differences, and I don't think like there's anything wrong with the studio being like, this game is substantially bigger than this other thing and is way more complex and just required more expenses for them to be like, we think it's legitimate to, make the price higher. I also just think that as a whole, to that kind of point you made, that kind of counter as well, is the fact that I think all games should be more expensive. You're talking to the wrong person. I'm the guy who's been like, I've said for years, games should be more expensive than they are. We've been getting away with murder. I'm legitimately so curious, what the cost of inflation has gone up in the last 20 years, but I'm going to assume it's gone up something. And if it's gone up something, then it's a little, games haven't gone up at all, right? But it's cost more to make them. The parts have cost more. Everything, the pay people has cost more, right? Every aspect of making a game has increased exponentially in 20 years, except for the actual game price, which is where they get their money back. And it's just at a certain point in time, it's these things just need to be more expensive, right? Movie tickets are more expensive.
I mean, the argument that I would make, though, is a lot of games are more expensive than they need to be. I would submit, or are bigger than they need to be.
That's a whole other conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, and that to going back to kind of my analogy or whatever. I personally also very much usually will do a kind of cost benefit analysis of how much, when Animal Crossing that I've put probably 400 hours into now, I paid $60 for that game, so I'm getting a really great dollars per hour value out of that game, or something like Skyrim that I put 300 hours into. But at the same time, I don't devalue Journey, which I could play through in 2 hours or something like that, or Gone Home or something like that. So it's not purely a how many hours am I going to get out of this experience. And then there are other experiences where I've Assassin's Creed Odyssey, you love, I like less, but I still played through the whole game. I put 80 hours into that game, and it's not there are a lot of hours in that game that I wasn't enjoying, and I think that game was longer than I needed it to be, but it was a thing to do at the time, so it was it crossed my threshold of I'm enjoying this enough to keep playing, and so everybody has their own value that they're going to assign to games, and that's where I use the movie thing not as a you're getting X number of hours in the theater and that's why you should pay $15 a movie ticket or something like that. That's why I specifically looked at it from the side of Avengers is spending $200 million because they know that they're putting into it and they're going to get $2 billion back, kind of thing. And Parasite is gonna switch that up or something like that. But yeah, the idea of the value of the game is how many hours you get out of it is a valid way to kind of assign value to a game, but it's not the only way, and it's and there is a quality component. I would, especially as I'm getting older, you mentioned a topic we might discuss next week is kind of what do you want out of next gen kind of games. And I'm 35 now. I kind of want shorter experiences. I don't want necessarily every game to be 100 hours, 120 hours like a Persona, and every game isn't that, but I'm kind of looking for that sweet spot of give me a really well polished 10 to 12 hour experience that I can just get in, play in a week and really enjoy and really sink my teeth into. But don't give me a game that I'm gonna have to play over the period of a month, because there's just so many other things also out that I want to play. But even again, going to the value of time and stuff, I'm a terrible judge of this because I also will spend hundreds of dollars on a theater ticket to go see live theater, which is a 2 hour, 2 to 3 hour experience that's once and fleeting and done. Especially if you consider the value of that to the value of a movie. But I also subscribe to the idea that experiences are much more memorable and much more valuable to me personally than things necessarily. When I look around outside of video games, I don't have a lot of crazy big possessions or something like that in my head. I'm not the TV I have works fine for me, so I don't need to go out and buy a new $2,000 TV because the one I bought 7 years ago or whatever is still giving me just as good of an experience as I'm gonna need for the kind of stuff I'm enjoying. So yeah, I mean I also see the point though that we've long been kind of benefiting from developers reticence to increase the price of their games, because if you, like, again, comparing that like $70 for NBA Hang Time, that's basically the value of 2 games today, at $113. It's almost 2 $60 games that you could buy today, and the fact that like pricing hasn't gone up equivalent to that, is a whole other thing, that I'm interested to see kind of who fires the next shot in this, and like I said, like what does somebody like EA do in response to this, because they're going to be, on this note at least, 2K's kind of biggest competition. Really kind of, it'll, like, that's where we say, okay, is the industry going to kind of become an oligarchy, and they're going to all kind of, align behind this $70 price point, or are they going to keep things varied in the years to come?
Yeah, I'm very curious to see how the industry as a whole kind of reacts to this in terms of what other games start being priced at next gen, right? Because if, like, what, Horizon 2 is $60 and Halo Infinity 45 is $60 and everything else comes out at $60, then this is more of an aberration and not necessarily a pivot point. So it'll be interesting to see what the pricing for the next generation of kind of games looks like at launch, and then possibly kind of going forward from there.
Yeah, and if nobody else follows suit, does 2K walk this back and say, hey, okay, I guess we won't do $70?
NBA 2K22, not as much money.
Or, I mean, like, just even 2K21, after, a month or two, they're like, okay, here's a permanent price cut, and now it's $60. and the people that, paid $70 for it, they'll give them some kind of like perks or free loot bags or something like that, in the game. Mm-hmm. It's a fascinating kind of start to this conversation. Really, the most interesting aspect is what happens next.
Yeah. The final thing that I will say is just Trevor is right, which itself per usual. Sports games should just become Destiny. It makes sense. The reason they don't is because money. But it's very obvious that they should. Any other final thoughts, Trev?
I don't think so. I mean, like one of the things I am really, again, really curious about, especially for a lot of the, like, especially on like what Microsoft is going to be doing, kind of like, I think they've come out and said that basically there's going to be at least a year plus of like cross-gen stuff, that like where games that you can play on the Xbox One X, you can also play on the Series X, and you won't get like Series X exclusives for the first year at least. So it'll be like, okay, if you can buy the game on the Xbox One X at a lower price, do you have to pay more to play it on your Series X? What does that look like? And admittedly, like, that's only ever been like a first party thing for them. But since we've already seen third party people like Ubisoft come out and say like, yeah, you'll get a free update, or Square Enix with Avengers say, yeah, you'll get a free update. Cyberpunk with CD Projekt Red with Cyberpunk, yeah, you get a free update. Like, it's almost like 2K is already a little tone deaf on that if they're forcing it right now, because it doesn't seem that if you buy like the PS4 version or the Xbox One X version of NBA 2K21, you're not getting the Xbox Series X version with it. So, yeah, fascinating stuff.
Very interesting to see what happens next. I'm very kind of curious to see what other people in the industry kind of say, what are the big companies. But with all that said, Trev, take us to the next story.
Yeah, so the one of the other big stories that broke kind of around the same time as this one, really, it was pretty much a busy Thursday last week, I want to say, is all the stuff kind of that has come out in the sport gaming world. There was a whole bunch of kind of continuing on with the like reckoning of the games industry and sexual assault and harassment and abuse kind of conversation that we've seen in the last few weeks. The fighting game community, specifically with Smash, had a lot of allegations that kind of broke last week, as well as the CEO of EVO, was kind of caught up and embroiled in some allegations that ultimately led to companies like Capcom and NetherRealm and Sega and all of them really pulling out of EVO to the point that EVO has canceled their online competition that they were going to do. They'd already had to cancel the in-person event at Vegas because of everything going on with the coronavirus pandemic. But this top-down, insidious kind of stuff going on in their industry really kind of forced their hand, and they had to cancel EVO, the online component of 2020, and they'll be back next year. And since you nor I are really incredibly versed in this, I decided to sit down with Cameron, who is kind of our fighting game expert, to sit down, and so we will throw it over to Trevor and Cameron. Thank you, Trevor. I'm here with Cameron Abbott, our resident That Nerdy Sites esports expert. We'll have to come up with some actual kind of proper title for you, Cam. But when we saw this news starting to break the other day, kind of all of the fighting game news, we both, I think all of us recognize that you would be the one to really kind of weigh in on this as somebody who has much more of an ear to the ground on kind of esports in general, but here specifically the fighting game community. So when we saw this stuff kind of breaking, it was like, well, this is clearly going to be one of the big stories this week. So let's get Cam involved. So Cameron, if you can summarize kind of what we've seen here in the fighting game community as it relates to Smash as well as EVO here in the last few days.
To summarize in just a few words, perverts, and horrible human beings in general.
That's peek behind the curtain. We had to kind of restart this segment because of a mic issue, and Cameron was like, "I think I can also summarize that much more quickly," and that certainly was a much more brief summary.
Yeah.
So a little more extended summary that you kind of spoke of in the first time around is a lot of what we're seeing seems to be kind of the boys club, the old boys club of the fighting game community, and EVO in particular, which has been going on since 1996, kind of coming to a head, and people being outed and kind of exposing maybe the cover-ups that have been kind of letting abusers kind of run rampant in EVO in particular, but even just in the broader fighting community as a whole. I would say the big thing on the EVO side that I even saw as kind of an outsider was the first thing I was seeing really even was Capcom and NetherRealm pulling out of EVO and basically saying, hey, because of these allegations, we're not going to be participating in it. And that led me to dig down, well, what are the allegations that are coming out? And so what has come out is one of the founders of EVO and the CEO, Joey Queller, aka Mr. Wizard, has been kind of outed as like a serial abuser and harasser and sexual abuser,
and a pedophile.
Speaking to things like pedophilia, kind of targeting underage kind of members of the fighting community, fighting game community, with in particular kind of one of the things that launched the conversations being a allegation from Mikey Crackprawn Fam, that is the name out there and the alias and tag and everything, who kind of wrote a big long Twitter thread in the spirit of many of the threads we've seen, many of the longer threads I've seen certainly in the last couple weeks, kind of outing abusers and saying like, this is my story, I'm speaking out now. And he talked about stories going back to when he was like at the age of 9 and kind of looking up to some of these people. So the abuse very clearly in his case occurred prior to the age of 18, and that kind of led that seems to have led other victims to come forward, as well as that seemed to be kind of one of the trigger points for companies like Capcom, NetherRealm, and Bandai Namco to pull out of EVO and basically say they weren't going to be participating on any of this stuff.
As a note,
before
Sega,
the show got
Sega
canceled,
and Arc System Works also pulled out.
Okay,
completely,
yeah, I mean, like, everybody. Oh, before the cancellation occurred.
I mean,
okay.
every sponsor and every like basically every major sponsor and every game company who was going to let their game be there have like they all pulled out right before the announcement that the event was canceled. So
Yeah, right before the official cancellation. Makes sense. I mean, yeah, none of them really want to be kind of lumped in with that. I saw a very, I think, pointed tweet from Imran Khan, who obviously works with our friends over at Kind of Funny, and previously of Game Informer, who was out there talking about, for that whole, for the whole day, basically, story after story about sexual abuse allegations and rape allegations and statutory rape allegations were being written up, and the go-to image in a lot of those cases was Min Min, the new fighter in Smash, and that's immediately something Nintendo is going to want to distance itself from and basically not kind of be associated with. So immediately those companies are going to have to, for kind of PR sake, come out and disavow and condemn all that kind of stuff.
it was already hard enough to get Nintendo to put any kind of support whatsoever behind the Smash community. Like that's gone. Like I can honestly say the support from Nintendo for the Smash community is probably gone forever.
Yeah, that was another
if it
bit
ever
of
returns,
Imran's.
I'd be grateful because that means they have faith in the people remaining in it. But it is like, because here's a big part of the issue is that a big part of the fighting game community controversy is there's a mass purge of abusers in the Smash community right now, the competitive Smash community. Everything from streamers to like tournament competitors to tournament organizers to like team management people have all like a bunch of people have been outed for like anything relating from grooming, pedophilia, sexual assault, unwanted sexual advances to things just plain straightforward as like really terrible verbal and physical abuse, like not relating to instances of sexual abuse, but just a whole lot of stuff, especially stuff that is like a lot of people's statements were directed at specific Smash scenes, as well as like specific areas, locations where Smash is big, whether it's New England, Hawaii, Houston, these places that because a big part of the fighting game community is you rep where you're from, because the people you practice with, the people that you surround yourself with, are the people in your local fighting game community. And so these have been hub spots for people to come, even if you're not from there, but you think, hey, this location has a certain style of, play that I want to learn. That's massive. Like people go from a big story was the Tekken champion from EVO 2019 was from Pakistan, and people didn't even know about this incredible Tekken scene in Pakistan. And so some of the best Tekken players in the world from South Korea literally started flying to Pakistan to start spending time with the fighting game community there to try to improve their skills. Like there's a real sense of not just camaraderie, but like there's a real sense of inclusion and relation and deep ties that tie the fighting game community together on such deep and intrinsic levels that stuff like this happening is probably something that we should have seen on the like this is where that type of behavior permeates and infests and infects. And so
yeah, it's
not
certainly
surprising.
something that we've seen in recent weeks in many walks of life, kind of in our industry, seeing a lot of these kind of reckoning moments kind of come out. Back to your point real quick about Nintendo not really actively supporting this scene. Another Imran kind of pull I wanted to make. Imran Khan, Imran ZOMG on Twitter. Not that they ever intended for it to be this reason, but Nintendo's reluctance to embrace the competitive Smash Brothers community kind of worked out for them here. They do not have to go nearly as far to distance themselves from the seemingly widespread predation. I thought that was a very kind of like the Nintendo's insistence on being Nintendo about things meant that they kind of are distant enough from this already going in that that Nintendo doesn't end up looking bad as like they were promoting a lot of this stuff in a way that maybe some of the more intimate organizations with EVO have been. But the fact that I would flip that even and say, well, the fact that Nintendo was so hands off and not enforcing, better standards among their own kind of community, it helps allow these kinds of negative kind of bubbles to thrive, in the same way that like internet communities in any walk of kind of the industry, if the companies themselves aren't doing a better job of moderation and enforcement on and trying to entrust and instill certain policies, those things will fester, and we will kind of see these things, and it's unfortunate. So we're looking at kind of two separate but connected stories here. In particular, we're looking at the EVO story of EVO is being canceled, and basically everybody's pulling out of that, as well as the kind of repeated abuse kind of cases that are coming forward in the Smash scene. On the EVO side, I think we've touched on a lot of that already. And can you fill me in on, because the CEO has, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I saw that he has been fired.
Yes, he was removed.
Like the board of directors removed him from EVO, so he won't be around that scene anymore, or like at least in name. But obviously, like, a lot of the damage is done, and the fact that he's been doing this and getting away with it for 20 years, is problematic. His comment, pulling from this Polygon article, Queller has since apologized. "I'm sorry, I never meant to hurt anyone," Queller said in a statement, also made on Twitter. "I was young and reckless and did things I'm not proud of. I have been growing and maturing over the past 20 years, but that doesn't excuse anything. All I've been trying to do is become a better person." But you were saying, either in our first pass at this or even before we started recording, he kind of has a history of sending and soliciting dick pics in the FGC community.
Yeah, allegedly. This is not something that he confirmed in his statement. He did confirm the first incident in his statement. Mm-hmm. But in this statement, so allegedly he has been for years soliciting and sending pictures, like dick pictures. And it should be noted, something that really should be hammered out in the story that was given by, my apologies, I want to make sure I get his name correct, but I believe it's
Mikey Pham?
No, I think it's Yoshi Nanaselo. Oh. It's either Yoshi Nanaselo or Anton. I'm not sure which one it is. I actually have it pulled up here. So this is... Yeah, no, so it's not Yoshi, it is Anton, I believe. So, to kind of explain, a big thing that really leapt out in his details of his allegations that Mr. Wizard himself, not directly admitting to, but very much, like, you don't say, over the last 20 years I've been trying to better myself, without kind of nailing down a date range of what you're referring to, and what the accusation that you're responding to is. It should be noted that there is, and this is a problem actually in the fighting game community that, people were aware of, but I think shining the light on it now really recognizes the depth of kind of how horrible it is. But there is such a massive amount of exploitation, the fetishization or degradation of women in the scene, racism, transphobia, just outright just thievery. To say that this has been a reckoning is not this has very much been a reckoning. This is, and that might be putting it lightly. We're talking about, hundreds of accusations being put forward on every level of possible abuse or just disgusting behavior overall. And it's important to note that in Mr. Wizard's, or in the story about Mr. Wizard and the allegation made that he indirectly admitted to, they make reference to Mr. Wizard's sexuality, that he's gay. And I get frustrated with that because this is definitely something, as both of us were around in the 90s, there is this incredibly false narrative pushed by homophobic people that gay people or people... LGBTQ people in general are predators.
Yeah,
that they
and we saw
yeah
like this flared up again when the whole Kevin Spacey thing happened a couple years ago. Like he tried to use that as like an excuse for his actions, and everybody was like, "No, fuck you. You're a creep." There are plenty of people that are homosexual that do not like exhibit any kind of predatory behavior or pedophilia or that kind of shit. Fuck you for trying to like play that
yeah
card.
try and that's what the big thing. One of the bigger things I took away from this allegation and this statement made by this person was they all passed it off as, oh well, it's just Mr. Wizard trying to get his like this is an indirect quote, but like nightly wank material. Like this is his like getting like this is a material that gets him off because he's gay. And the 90s, I understand that definitely being like a pervasive thing. One of the biggest things that I was afraid of when coming out was that would be seen as something that I would have to, you know, that is a fear that I had, 20 years later after these events, 20 plus years later after these events. So to have that be like something that was brought up there really hurt and offended me. Um, because like this is something that you saw it when in the trans community when people are like, well, you can't let trans trans women into women's bathrooms because a pervert in a dress will try to show up and just try to assault somebody or your kids. And it was just like that's so unbelievably offensive on such a deep level. Um, and so like to see that pop up here made me very upset. But also like you said with Kevin Spacey, like you're not like it's not that you're like this is not a moment for it to be like, oh, it's your sexuality. Like no, you're a pedophile. Like you had young men under the age of 18 do these sexual acts for you for your benefit for tokens to a local arcade. Like you are a textbook example of a creep, disgusting pedophile. So like the last 20 years you've been trying to better yourself. Like I'm like not buying it whatsoever. Um, on a personal level, like that's my kind of response to it. I will say that there's a lot more nuance to the levels of allegations going on in the Smash community, especially
Hmm.
because there's just like different varying degrees of just abuse on just about every possible level. And it's important to note that this is especially important to point out that Smash is a game with characters from children's video games, like children-centered, family-focused video games. Smash is like a Nintendo title that is played by young children everywhere. Being a pro player in the Smash scene is the dream of so many young kids, early teenagers, that they start, at age 13 you can start partaking in tournaments. That's a massive thing for these kids. And to have like these people in their 20s and their 30s up to their 40s like grooming these kids, like being what's the right word for this? Not predatoring, but like just like, prowling for these children is it's horrifying to actually like when you actually take a step back and think about it. Because when I think about the Smash community, at least like the stories I've heard and like some of the stuff that I've seen, I think of like dudes in their late teens, like through their 20s, like some of them don't shower. That's kind of been like a very bad stereotype for Smash players over the years, especially Melee players. You know who you are, who like don't shower, or like they just like it's just a lot of like funk comes with these people. And like that's what I think of. I don't think of kids. I don't think of kids as young as like, my nephews or nieces that are, but here's the thing. That's part of the demographic that plays these games. That's part of the demographic of people who want to get involved in this community. And it is because there has not been oversight by Nintendo, and because there was like the Smash ethics panel or something like that was established to basically review players' behavior and kind of put out notices that you should probably ban this player from attending your events or being part of your tournaments. I've read that over. I believe it was in regards to allegations against Ally or Anti. Actually, I think it was Anti who was involved in that one. Um,
I'm seeing. So I'm reading through, and I will include the link in the description for the DualShockers article on the Smash allegations, written by a friend of the channel, Cameron Hawkins. And they're saying last year there was a scandal regarding Captain Zack and Elliot Bastian
Yes.
Ali Carosa Oyarse, where Louth admitted to throwing matches to Ali as well as being in an underage relationship with Carosa being twice his age.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yeah, that is, and to be completely honest, like that is a actual issue that is a massive part of what's being revealed now. Players who are in their later teens or in their 20s now are speaking out. Another big one was Senpai, also known as
Yeah.
Cinnamon, and Puppe, and like when you read that, you're seeing predatory behavior, and it's not just the men, it's women in the scene as well. Um, Although on the flip side of that, I will say that women, for the most part, are definitely more victims than
Yeah.
they are predators, as as you'd probably expect. But it's
As
yeah,
like yeah, as historical evidence would suggest, but not every case.
not every case. And I will also and it's also important to note that like our current culture regarding the power dynamics between men and women and older women, like choosing younger partners is seen as less of a, oh, this is a predator, and more of a, oh, dude, you hooked up with her, awesome, high five, yeah, she's like way older than you. It's totally not like a power imbalance and like a definite like issue of grooming.
Yeah, I mean, like we see that I think in many instances. Like the notion of the teacher, go like having a relationship with a student or something was jokingly always like the kid in school you wanted to be that guy or whatever, and for whatever reason it's like the whole hot for teacher mentality or whatever. It's like that. Yeah, sure. I mean, even in we talked about it extensively in our Persona 5 spoiler cast, like the idea that like you as a student can have a relationship with your teacher in that game. It's like there are a lot of things wrong with that, just from a ethical and storytelling perspective, but it's in the game, and it's a very troubling dynamic that they just completely don't address really head on in that regard. So yeah, there are a number of dynamics on this. A lot of what I'm seeing here is 14 to 24 or something like that. I think was the age gap between Glyph and Senpai that you're kind of touching on right there. And then there are others that I'm seeing of like the younger party was 15, the older party was 20. I think back to my own personal experience where I was 18, dating a 16-year-old in high school, and I graduated so I graduated that year, and that also just happened to end up being like the end of our relationship, basically. So it didn't really like progress into an issue where it would have been like really extensively problematic, but it is like there is that threshold of when you're when you're both that young or something like that. I think we started dating when I was 17 or something. What is that like? Where are the lines there? There are absolutely like legal lines depending on where you're at. We're seeing, just I can throw this to you as well, because as we're seeing all of this kind of reckoning in the games industry, you're probably also aware that we're seeing there's a whole speaking out movement in the wrestling industry as well.
Yes, there is.
And especially in the UK scene where age of consent is different and whatnot. There's a whole bunch of kind of conversations around that whole, it may have been legal, but was it right? No. Being the kind of sentiment I've seen in a few of those stories, and I admittedly have not been keeping up all that closely in those outside of just seeing name after name after name of largely indie wrestlers that I don't really follow or see anyway being kind of outed in that circumstance. So that's what I see a lot of in this instance, is that because this is an industry that is like these people were all young when they got into it and just kind of were thrown into it. It's like they didn't learn better at that time, and when they cross that threshold into adulthood, they're still having relationships with these people that they see as peers, even if they aren't really peers in that sense and shouldn't be be establishing those relationships.
And
and I think there's
I think
there's absolutely a lot of like problematic stuff. There's absolutely stuff that like very clearly crosses lines in a lot of these cases, but there are a lot of these where it's like, I can understand why there's a blur here and why people didn't realize they were being abused or didn't think of themselves as being abused. I mean, I even think outside of this too, one of my friends, talks about would talk about the idea that when she was in high school, she didn't have any like qualms against dating somebody 10 years older than her or something like that. And it's like, well, like, I feel like you probably should have, but like she even now, she doesn't look at that relationship as like a predatory relationship. She, is glad she's not in it, but she doesn't look at him as a predator, but she might, with, additional context or additional, hindsight coming out just because of where she was and who she was at that time.
And it's important to note, like, when you talk about things like consent and like age of consent, like I personally have always felt like not only is it a law, but it's a pretty strong guideline to look at. Like, not everybody who's 18 is going to have an adult mentality. In fact, for the most part, they won't.
Yeah.
It's 18 it's not an arbitrary number, but it's certainly a very specific number that can sometimes like have that gray area attached to it. And if you are involved in a positive like relationship where there hasn't been grooming, there hasn't been any of that, I don't know if I have any right whatsoever to say, okay, no, that's what that is, because I'm not any sort of expert on like child psychology or like adult psychology or sexual psychology or anything like that. I will leave it to the experts to make determinations like that. But what I will say is, you can also probably link this to behavior that is inherited almost. And I say that in the principle that abuse is cyclical. These relationships and the standards of these relationships are cyclical. There's a very, very, very good chance that the people who are in their 20s or 30s who are getting outed right now as being these abusers and being these problematic people, it's likely that it's behavior that was imprinted upon them when they themselves were abused by older people, most likely in the fighting game community. Like, the important thing to note here is that Mr. Wizard is a very much older man who was a full-on in his late 20s, early 30s adults in the 90s. I can't speak to what his age is now. I'm sure I could Google it real quick, but the reality is that this is a much, much older man who should not be and it's possible that other people at his age or who are in charge of and more of these heads of these organizations and independent tournaments and events, there's a good chance that this is behavior that has been, the abuse gets imprinted upon you, and then as an outlet for your abuse, you abuse others. I'm not saying that's definitely what happened, but I am very curious to look at, if we look at when everything's said and done, when things have been settled, can we look at individuals and kind of connect the dots at that point? And that'll be an interesting thing to kind of look at when we look at the cycle of abuse, where it started, how it continued through, because something that I've learned very recently is it's kind of been a if you know then you know kind of secret that several of these prominent industry figures in the fighting game community are in fact gay. But then they're also targeting young men, and so it brings into that level of the conversation I brought up earlier, and why I want to bring that up earlier to kind of set a barometer of what we're looking at here, because if you're a predator, you're a predator. You're searching for younger men or women, and that's what you're targeting. Now, if you are this underlining thing is, I had no idea that it was it was okay to be that open in regards to your sexual, or maybe contrary to that, hiding it. I don't know. It's difficult because I think Sonic Fox, in particular,
Yeah, I mean
he kind
that's
of blew
the
the doors
interesting
off
one.
everything.
He did, and so that's what like I think of like when I think of the fighting game community, I think of somebody like Sonic Fox, and so much of that is he's absolutely out there being an advocate, um, and trying to like own his sexuality and take away the stigma from it, which I imagine like now I'm seeing that in the context of maybe a whole bunch of people that are keeping that more close to the vest and using that as kind of a predatory tactic. I don't know, like obviously I've seen he's made some comments on this and like fuck all those people or whatever. I don't know, like it's the kind of thing like how much of this did he know and wasn't speaking out on, and just in general how much of how much of this has been like a dirty little secret within the scene that people try and like hide or at least don't like shine a spotlight on because it will negatively impact the scene as a whole, and they don't want to kind of have to deal with the aftermath of that. It's certainly one of those things that I think always. I mean, in the same way that like when the Me Too movement really hit Hollywood, everybody seemed to have known about Harvey Weinstein being the shit person that he had long since been, but he'd been protected for years because people weren't speaking out, and so we see that I think here again in the games industry, and now specifically in the kind of subset of the fighting game community, where people clearly knew this was a problem, and may have done the same kinds of whisper campaigns around that that were trying to protect individual people, but if you didn't run in the circles with the right people and you didn't get clued in on the situation, you potentially end up becoming another victim, and that's terrible and unfortunate.
I think that's a very real thing on several levels of what you were talking about, but in particular, like there's no ifs or buts about it. Mr. Wizard was the most, if not one of the most, if not the most powerful people in the fighting game community. He literally could make or break careers. If you were a competitor or you were part of an organization or a local event, some place where you were like helping out with EVO or anything like that, like he could put you on like he has a very powerful blacklist. I'll put it that way. Where if he puts you on his blacklist, if he puts you on his shit list, like you're done in the fighting game community. Because the fighting game community is built, and this is why this is such a not groundbreaking, but like it's such a like earth-shattering like result. Like what you're getting out of it is very earth-shattering if you're part of the community on any level, because the fighting game community is built off trust. It's built off trust and respect, and will there be trash talking and bad manners? For sure. It's literally like the entire point of the fighting game community is to just fight against other people. So of course it's going to come out, but at the end of the day, people show respect and they care and they have trust, or at least I thought so. Like I think on the majority of people who are part of the fighting game community, that is definitely the case still. But this does have serious ramifications to where is people's trust in the fighting game community going to lie in, because EVO was the mecca, the grand standard of you go there, you make it to the finals, it's a big deal. Your game gets chosen as one of the 7 games at EVO, it's a big deal. Like that's where you get tons of sales, because people who may not be too interested in a game because they don't know about it, learn about it, and they see people at the highest point of performance playing that game, and they go, man, I want to do that. I want to play that. And that's a big selling point for a lot of these games. And so it's brutal. Like it's brutal to see just the depth and just depravity that's existed in this community. And it breaks my heart. Like it breaks my heart into a million pieces. There's plenty of people who have been given reactions to this. Like you said, people who either had cursory knowledge or in-depth knowledge, like it varies at several degrees. Mm-hmm. And even then, if you look at somebody like Mr. Wizard, like here's the thing: if somebody told me, hey, yeah, the the CEO of EVO, how he's gay, was like, I heard he's a pedophile. My first reaction would be like, first off, like, once again, I'm gonna get really offended about that because of the people who construe pedophilia with homosexuality. I'm gonna get really upset about that because I'm like, is this just one of those things that you're saying because gay people prowl for young underage men? And it's like, no, he's legitimately, like, it looks like he's a pedophile. And like, I probably would have, like, if you had brought that up, like, if somebody had brought that up to me on like a one-on-one level, I'd be like, I don't know about that, man, because I feel like that's definitely something could have been.
Your initial response is to get defensive, as we've seen a lot of people, even if they're not related to this. If that's the initial response, that's maybe an initial response we need to kind of work to condition ourselves away from. Like, you can, or you can, like, that can be kind of the internal processing, but also, hey, recognize that this is being introduced to me. Maybe I should take it with the intent that they're delivering this information to me, and dig deeper to what is it? Trust but verify.
Yeah, trust.
That whole thing.
Trust and verify.
Trust that they're coming. Yeah, trust then verify that they're coming to you with this information of, like, in good faith, and don't just immediately be like, well, fuck you, and fuck you for perpetuating, like, that hurtful stigma. Oh, he was actually perpetuating that hurtful stigma? Well, fuck him then. Like, that's absolutely the worst case of what's going on there, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah. I guess final thoughts on this topic with you, Cam. What does this kind of do for EVO next year? Obviously, they're off this year. They currently are planning to come back in 2021, and obviously, they were already hit heavily with the COVID stuff. But what does EVO 2021 look like? Does the scene have to kind of burn itself down to come back? Do the game companies come back to it next year?
I will say this: the number one thing EVO has to do is it has to find a way to begin. And honestly, the real truth of this is, people need to go in and tear down the walls, and if there's rot, tear it out. It's pretty much the way you have to kind of go through that entire situation with any kind of community or any kind of group that has had to deal with these sorts of the fallout of these events, where you have to go in, you have to tear down the walls, and you have to examine it. And if it's rotted through, tear it out. If it can be rehabilitated, rehabilitate it. If it can be treated, treat it. Like, there's varying levels of just, like, let me rephrase that. Basically, every possible level of and degree of severity of abuse is happening and has been exposed. So you kind of need to go step by step and kind of look at every single level of that to determine what you're like, and it should be done on a case by case basis, like we're seeing it, like what it looks like it's happening right now with. But EVO, especially the Cannon brothers, need to really come out and, like, be transparent. Like, if people knew about this and the extent that they knew about it, like, they need to take responsibility for that. That's a massive part of, like, regaining the trust of the community. And another thing is, like, they're like, where they're gonna have it, how it's gonna happen. Like, it can't be EVO as normal. Like, something has to change to show that there has been hurt, and that hurt is being addressed, and it's being healed. And I don't know what that looks like. I hope EVO comes back, because EVO, to so many people, is such a massive celebration of wonderful things, and tearing out the rot from that is definitely the priority. But I just hope there's something still worth left standing, and there realistically may not be.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what 2021 holds. Well, thank you, Cam, for sitting down to talk through this with me and kind of provide your insight and expertise on the subject matter. We will throw it back over to Logan to wrap up the show.
Thanks for that, Trev. Yeah, that's the show. Thank you for listening. If you like what you heard and you liked Cameron's thoughts on all the things fighting games and EVO and the news all about that we all have definitely listened to together, be sure to tweet him kind words of support and your own thoughts. And then, yeah, you can go support us over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. like all of our wonderful patrons whose support has led to numerous different shows, including this one coming into existence. So thank you all for your support. And yeah, again, you can go over to patreon.com/thatnerdysite to do it and help us reach new goals and new heights with the site. You can also go rate, review, like, subscribe, and share on all kinds of podcast services around the globe. Those 5-star ratings really do help on iTunes, especially for new shows like this. Again, we're trying to beat Car Talk, so every little bit helps.
That is an unattainable goal.
Please help us do it. All right, we can take those, brothers. Yeah, so that's the show. You can find Trev at Trevor J. Starkey on Twitter. Anything you'd like to plug or shout out, Trev?
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to, as we kind of touched on briefly at the top of the show, you can listen to yesterday's That D Plus show, where Logan and I sit down and discuss Hamilton. And that D Plus show in general for kind of the near term future is going to be a series of me sitting down with different people to talk about Hamilton. Now that that show is very near and dear to my heart, is out on Disney Plus and accessible to the masses. So I've already got next week I'm sitting down with Cameron, and then I've got kind of plans to sit down with Jazz from that nerdy site, as well as some other guests here. So keep an eye to the D Plus show feed for lots and lots of Hamilton talk.
Yes, you can go find Cameron at Rev Cabot. I assume that he is going to shout out.
He'll shout out his episode next week of that D Plus show.
He'll shout out his episode as well. You can find me at Lefty Logie to complete the trifecta. I will also give a shout out to Hamilton, my episode with Trev, that, like he mentioned earlier, you can already listen to right now when the show is live. It was a ton of fun. It was one of the longest podcasts we've done in a while. I had a blast doing it. I always love talking Hamilton with you. And it is just the first of many more convos that we will have, I'm sure, on the show. Yes, and then you can go find That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site. We've got all kinds of podcast reviews, features, everything happening. You can find all that out on our Twitter feed and site and YouTube and Instagram. I don't know itself, whatever people are doing, Snapchat filters. And until next time, stay nerdy and be good to each other.